The Stonewall Inn, located in the heart of New York City's Greenwich Village, a haven for LGBTQ plus patrons, their friends, and their allies. Good evening, I'm Angelo Bavaro. In the early hours of June 28, 1969, New York City police officers raided the bar, a common practice during those days. But on this particular night, the city's LGBTQ plus community fought back. It sparked a civil rights movement that rippled across the U.S. and around the world. Tonight, we remember the legacy of the 1969 Stonewall Riots, and we honor the month that the LGBTQ plus community celebrates the freedom to be themselves. This is Pride is Everywhere, a celebration of LGBTQ plus visibility.
No matter what's going on around you, no matter how hard it gets, you gotta keep doing you, baby, because only you can do you.
Now, before we get started, we want to go over some key terms that you will hear throughout today's show. Fox 61's Erica Arias breaks down what the community calls the queer alphabet.
You've probably heard the acronyms LGBT and LGBTQ. Each letter carries a significant meaning, and it keeps changing, so let's break it down. First of all, it's all about inclusion and taking ownership of one's gender and sexual identity. Until around the 1960s, the word gay was used to describe anyone who did not fit into the default societal idea of heteronormativity. The community then started to embrace the gay identity with pride. It's since evolved into more specific words for different identities, like lesbian and bisexual and transgender. In recent years, the Q was added to the acronym to represent people who might not identify as LGBT, and it stands for queer, and sometimes questioning. The Q also acknowledges a fluidity in gender and sexuality. However, it's not used by all members of the LGBT community, since it was once used as a way to put down people. As the acronym continues to evolve, the plus sign was added to acknowledge the limitless sexual and gender identities used by members of the community. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Bottom line, it's all about inclusion and respect.
The fight for inclusion and respect, that started well before 1969. Throughout the show, we'll take a look back at some of the milestones that shaped the LGBTQ plus community that we know today. Fox 61's Jen Bernstein has a look back at some of the battles that took place in the political arena.
In the 1950s, gays and lesbians began to form the first civil rights groups that protested discrimination by the federal government. Among them, Bayard Rustin, a gay man who worked with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and helped organize the 1963 March on Washington. In 1966, transgender women and drag queens staged demonstrations at Compton's cafeteria in San Francisco, protesting ongoing police harassment. In the early hours of June 28, 1969, LGBTQ plus patrons at the Stonewall Inn in New York City fought back after an unprovoked police raid. This sparked what is now the modern-day gay civil rights movement. November 1978, after leading a successful campaign to defeat an anti-gay proposal, San Francisco Supervisor Harvey Milk was gunned down along with Mayor George Moscone in City Hall. In 1994, Don't Ask, Don't Tell became the official U.S. policy on military service for LGBTQ plus people. Its repeal took effect in September 2011. 1998, October, in Wyoming, college student Matthew Shepard attacked, tied to a fence in a field, and left to die because he was gay. His death, part of what led to federal hate crime legislation. Also in 1999, a Vermont court said the state had to allow civil unions. In May of 2004, same-sex marriages were made legal in Massachusetts. The same happened in California a month later, but stopped in November after voters passed Proposition 8. A series of U.S. Supreme Court decisions in 2013 and 2015 made it legal nationwide. During the Trump administration, LGBTQ plus civil rights protections were rolled back in numerous ways, including protections for transgender students. So far in 2023, more than 530 anti-transgender laws have been proposed in state legislatures across the country. Many passed. Some 250 years of progress and rollbacks, privileges allowed, rights denied, equality still the desire of those who want to live their lives fully and love freely.
With digital photography, we document our lives almost every second, but in photography's earliest days, taking a portrait was intentional. Fox 61's Carmen Chow and senior digital content producer Doug Stewart introduce us to one Quinnipiac University librarian who is collecting vintage gay portraits and investigating the stories behind them.
You know, the early years of photography, if you wanted your portrait taken, you went to a studio. And actually, it wasn't until, I believe, the Brownie Kodak camera came into popularity that amateur photography became popular.
Nearly 2 trillion photos are taken every year. That's 5 billion a day, 57,000 a second. We record all the moments of our lives. Not long ago, taking a photo was a more thoughtful process, especially for LGBTQ+ people. Robert Young, a librarian at Quinnipiac University, has collected old photographs since he was a teen. Most of his collection is portraits of male couples.
I began noticing in a number of my photos, what we would say would be images showing affection between men. Someone with their arm around their shoulders, snuggling up, heads touching, things like that. So I became interested in that type of imagery, and I started wondering, does this show LGBTQ history?
About 50 photos in Young's collection are of Roger Pegram and Frank Bouchon, a gay couple in the 1950s.
They're interesting because they capture a wide swath of their lives, holidays, vacations, gathering with friends. There isn't a lot of intimacy, or what we would probably consider intimacy, in the photos.
The photos had notes on the back with names and dates. Research led Young to eventually make connections with those still alive who knew them.
I've spent about 12 years now researching the men's lives, their friends' lives. I've met family members, co-workers, people that knew them.
The couple split up in 1959, but remained close.
That the photos kind of give us another view of the 50s. We kind of think of the 50s as being, suburbia, mom and dad, 2 kids and a dog, but these photos provide a glimpse of gay life at that time, which is quite rare.
Young is working on a book about the couple and hopes their lives continue to impact others. But not all photos of gay couples come with so many details. Young tells the story of a couple in Philadelphia whose wedding ceremony photos from 1957 exist by sheer luck.
They dropped the film off at a camera store, and when the pictures were developed, the owner of the camera store saw, of course, what the subject was and refused to give the photos back to the couple. They said that the film had been ruined.
A woman who worked in the camera shop kept the prints, and when she died, her children inherited these photos and gave them to an archive in Southern California. The identity of the 2 men remains a mystery. While Young's collection focuses mostly on men, he acknowledges that there are others across the country focusing on lesbians and people of color.
Whenever I share these photos, like on a Facebook group for LGBTQ history or vintage photos that are of interest to gay men, I get such a huge response, from the community, showing that, we've always existed. We've been here. We've had lives.
Carmen Chow, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
When Pride is Everywhere continues, we will look at the hurdles that the LGBTQ+ community has overcome and talk about how Connecticut played a major role in this civil rights movement. Welcome back. After the Stonewall Riots, the shift in the political conversation about LGBTQ+ rights that rippled across the country sparked a movement of change right here in Connecticut. Fox 61's Jen Bernstein takes us through the state's fight for equal rights.
In 1975, Democratic legislator Betty Hudson from Madison was the first to propose legislation to ensure equal protections for lesbians and gay men in Connecticut. It was passed by the state Senate, making it the first state legislative chamber to pass such a bill in the United States. but Hudson's bill failed to pass in the House. In 1990, during then-Governor Bill O'Neill's State of the State speech, demonstrators interrupted him by calling for passage of the Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights Bill. They shouted and unfurled a banner from the gallery. That demonstration, part of what spurred the Connecticut legislature to pass some of the first hate crime laws in the country. In 1991, then-Governor Lowell Weicker signed legislation making Connecticut the third state in the country to legalize comprehensive protections for lesbians and gay men against discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodation. It would take 30-some years before the same protections were made legal for transgender men and women. Meanwhile, shortly after Vermont legalized same-sex civil unions in 1999, the call for official recognition for same-sex marriage began to trickle into other New England states. In 2005, then-Governor Jody Rell, a Republican, indicated that she would sign same-sex civil union legislation, but not same-sex marriage. And she did, making Connecticut the first state to pass same-sex civil union legislation without the courts ordering it to do so. Meanwhile, the argument was underway that civil unions were, in effect, separate and unequal. And in October 2008, the state Supreme Court agreed and ordered the state to begin issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. This effectively made Connecticut the second state to legalize same-sex marriage, Massachusetts the first. 7 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage should be allowed around the country. Change continued. In 2011, then-Governor Dan Malloy signed legislation that extended civil rights protections against discrimination based on gender identity and expression. In 2015, legislation made it legal for anyone born in Connecticut to change their gender markers on state-issued documents. Governor Malloy also signed into law a ban on conversion therapy and issued an executive order protecting transgender students. In 2019, Governor Ned Lamont outlawed the panic defense in criminal cases, where defendants claim the victim's sexual orientation or gender expression caused the defendants to panic and commit a crime. That year, the state also led efforts to allow student athletes to compete in sports competitions under their affirmed gender.
Now, as you just heard, the fight for same-sex marriage and equality under the law here in Connecticut took center stage in the political arena. The Nutmeg State is a leader in the LGBTQ plus civil rights movement. Fox 61's Emma Wolfhorst digs deeper into the past and how it's shaping our future.
I now pronounce you married.
We actually ended up pulling our wedding together in just a couple of weeks. So we said, let's do it in the house. We'll cater it ourselves. We'll have it at lunchtime.
Jody will make the quiche.
Beth Kerrigan and Jody Mock have been together for 30 years and married for 14.
It feels like we're normal. For me, it just feels like we're part of the fold, and that's what everyone does. They celebrate their days that they got married, or they were born, or, it's just a landmark.
A landmark Kerrigan and Mock didn't always have the right to.
With the Kerrigan decision in Connecticut really established its leader status on LGBTQ rights.
15 years ago, the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled gay and lesbian couples are entitled to full marriage equality, making Connecticut the second state in the country to legalize same-sex marriage.
We're just people that want the same thing everybody else has. The whole point of the suit was to make us normal, to normalize us, showing that you're just like your neighbors across the street. You just happen to be the same gender.
But showing that came with consequences.
Decision day was really scary. The press release came out for the case on a Thursday. On Monday, I was brought into an office for a private meeting, and I was terminated. I was shaking. I was trembling. I couldn't believe it.
14 years later, Connecticut and the country have come a long way, but the fight is far from over.
The day-to-day reality is that we hear from LGBTQ people that they still face discrimination on a daily basis. And that's why it's so important that not only we pass important protections and laws, but we also make sure that they're robustly enforced.
Don't assume that because you have this, it couldn't go away. If we were trying to do what we did 15 years ago, now, I think it would have been a lot tougher.
Wouldn't happen.
Kerrigan and Mock say even living in a state like Connecticut, they're still concerned about the future.
we haven't arrived.
Right.
We're not like kumbaya,
Right.
you know, this
No,
society.
we're still very conscious.
We're moving slowly, but the next generations, they have their struggles.
But struggles Kerrigan and Mock know the community will be ready to handle. In West Hartford, Emma Wolforst, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
When we come back, drag queens take weekend brunch to a whole new level, and the obstacles to gender-affirming medical care for the transgender community. Welcome back to Pride is Everywhere. LGBTQ plus Pride Month is dedicated to commemorating the impact this community has had on the history, locally, nationally, and also internationally. Now, it's also about celebrating everything it has to offer, and that is what our next story is all about. So hold on to those drinks as these queens are taking brunch to the next level. The Drag Queen Extravaganza, in collaboration with The Place to Be, is, well, the place to be on a Saturday morning. Symphony Privet and digital content producer Leah Myers have that story out of New Haven.
Two top trends.
They are stunning.
That go big.
Fabulous.
All in one place.
Amazing dancers.
It's the place to be to see Connecticut's drag queens.
In the last 5-ish years, there's been a huge grow in drag entertainment in Connecticut.
Sky Casper, the daddy of drag queen extravaganza. With his girls, the sky's not the limit.
You can usually find drag queens around your nearest water source or wherever you can find vodka.
This rise may be bigger than the Big Apple.
This was legit amazing.
The stakes are high.
If you like what you see, hold up $1, right? Are y'all ready for a good time, place to be?
I just love performing and just hearing people scream and have a good time. Easily my favorite.
It's the place to be, wild and free.
When I hear that people came to my event and they had an amazing time, that just makes me really happy.
The place to be entertained.
High energy, dance moves, slaying the game.
Amazed.
It was amazing. It was so much fun. The athleticism is incredible.
Included.
Inclusion, it's important to make people feel like they belong.
Everyone has the right to live their life how they want to live it.
What I really, really enjoy very much in drag is visibility.
What else is big? The representation.
My personality in drag is pretty much the Latin doll. I like to represent my culture, my roots, and my tradition as a Latin person.
And being a loud, proud Afro-Latina who just might happen to be plus size, to see that I am out there making a difference can just go ahead and show that there is a difference that needs to be made in this good old community.
Making big strides, but the show isn't over.
I think that drag is just starting, really. It's really great to offer these safe spaces for anyone that needs them, wants to come out and have a great time, and the vibes are really great, and we have an amazing time.
In New Haven, Symphony Privet, Connecticut's news station.
Coming out to your family as LGBTQ can be an overwhelming experience, and it's no less so if you're part of a Latino family. Those conversations can be difficult because Latinos care deeply about those family relationships. Fox 61's Gabby Molina and digital content producer Jeralise Diaz explore how those conversations are changing and the Latino community with them.
Latinos in the LGBTQ+ community are part of two groups that share a powerful sense of pride. When it comes to conversations revolving around identity and inclusivity, Rafael Feliciano Roman is on a mission to make sure Latinos and people in the LGBTQ+ community have a safe space they can turn to.
I was born and raised here in the city of Waterbury. Being a queer Latino Boricua was not a good story. I was actually kind of forced out by one of my little brother read my journal, and in that I had expressed my feelings and sentiments towards a young man that I had, summer love, puppy love in high school. I came out to my parents. It was a really awkward and uncomfortable time.
Charlie Ortiz, a psychotherapist and president of Claro, is using his story to promote equality.
I think I was gay since I could remember, but my days started probably when I was 8 years old. And my parents, of course, being Latino and very religious, they wanted to have all these children everywhere as grandparents, but it didn't happen.
For some, it's been much easier, who knew early on in life that their identity fell on the LGBTQ plus spectrum. They opened up about the difficult conversations they had with their families when they decided to live their life authentically.
Basically, it was more my mother bringing me out of the closet. I was about 14. She had noticed some changes in me, and she suspected that I was gay. So at one point, she just called me to the side and she said, "Are you gay?" I was, of course, denied it. I was like 14 years old. I was very young. And she said that it didn't matter to her.
I felt very nervous, and scared, mostly because I didn't know what kind of reaction I was going to get from my family. But for the most part, a lot of my family members were pretty supportive, and I'm pretty grateful for that.
Gabby Molina, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
When we come back, attacked while using the urinal at East Hartford High School.
I would have been killed.
A guidance counselor and student reconnect 33 years later. And we turn back the clock on the medical fight that the LGBTQ plus community has had to endure. Welcome back. Our next story is about a teenage boy who was attacked inside a bathroom at East Hartford High School for being gay. That was 33 years ago. Fox 61's Samaya Hernandez sits down exclusively with the gay hate crime survivor and the former guidance counselor who helped him when a school system failed to protect him.
I was different, I guess, for my time.
This isn't the first time Dennis Schleicher shared his story in front of bright lights and cameras.
You were brave, Dennis.
No, you were brave.
No.
In 1990 on stage at the Sally Jesse Raphael Show's New York City studios.
Everyone else was wearing wigs and disguises. So I was naive.
1991, front page of the Hartford Courant for taking a male to prom.
It was different. You were the first person, probably at the high school, that came out.
At 16, Dennis legally divorced his parents, who refused to accept his sexual identity based on their religion. School social worker Marilyn Dupree, one of his only allies.
The staff, in general, thought that I was gay because I defended you.
Dennis's troubles started before his press coverage. In October 1998, he was attacked in an East Hartford High School bathroom by 15 students.
They were calling me the F word. They were calling me every gay slang, and I didn't know it was me. And all of a sudden, a foot came and went, and I went right into the wall. They shut the bathroom door. There was a security guard that was monitoring the bathroom, and they're not supposed to shut the door. And he didn't stop them.
Dennis recalls being thrown at the door and blacking out.
All the kids started to chant, "Kill him, kill him, kill." But they were saying, "Kill that faggot."
He says it wasn't until he sprayed mace, given to him by a gay friend for protection, that the attackers backed off and he escaped to the principal's office.
Blood's coming out of my nose, my mouth, my teeth. And they did nothing. Nothing.
The others sent to the school nurse for treatment of their injuries from the incident, and police were called.
They charged me for 5 counts assault, 2 counts risk of injury to a minor.
The wounds from that day would shape the rest of his life. The attack inspiring teenage Dennis to come out publicly.
There was no hate crime bill to protect me. So nothing happened to the people who attacked me. Nothing. Nothing. But they came after me.
In 1991, Dennis testified in front of state lawmakers in support of a hate crime bill. He fears he would have died at East Hartford High if not for the mace in his pocket.
I would have been killed or paralyzed or without a doubt.
We came here to see what we can dig up, but the East Hartford Police Department only retained files for major cases like sexual assaults and homicides. Cases like Dennis's are destroyed after 10 years. Dennis was expelled, homeschooled, and given enough credits to graduate early in January of his senior year.
They robbed me of my education.
In a written statement, East Hartford Schools said it prohibits bullying and strives to make schools inclusive, referencing professional development for teachers and student equity groups at all middle and high schools.
You had to contend with teachers who were not accepting.
Connecticut Department of Education tracked 822 cases of bullying during the 2021-22 school year. Those numbers, the reason Dennis, a former Procter & Gamble VP, published author, and West Hartford-based self-proclaimed influencer, is sharing his story again at 50 years old.
I am now free from my past.
His message to bullying victims today.
Use that to turn into power. However, don't be silent about it.
In East Hartford, I'm Samaya Hernandez, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
Connecticut's first school created specifically for LGBTQ+ students plans to open this fall in New Haven. Now, this comes as lawmakers debate LGBTQ+ representation in schools all across the country. Fox 61's DeAndrea Turner sat down with the founder of Proud Academy to understand why a school like this is so important.
Well, sometimes we want to create what we didn't have. And so that's what I'm doing.
Patricia Patty Nicolari spent years inside of a school district as an educator and school principal. Beyond her passion for education is the desire to provide a safe space. It's personal.
Well, as a teacher in the 80s, as an in teacher, meaning not out about my sexual orientation, I knew how uncomfortable it felt for 15 years to have to pretend to be somebody else. So that began the process of me thinking, if I'm not feeling safe as the adult, I can't imagine how my students feel.
From here blossomed the Proud Academy, the first private school in the Northeast designed for LGBTQ+ students. For Nicolari, it is a dream 15 years in the making.
Unfortunately, my generation had to check a box. You're either gay or straight. And I was bisexual. I fell in love with a guy out of left field. And I thought, I can't run a school now when I can't even answer my own question when people say, so are you straight now?
She credits Gen Z for their fierceness in making this dream become a reality.
This generation actually helps us realize we don't need to check a box.
Taryn Degnan was the first openly transgender student in his high school. He is advocating for a place like Proud for students like him.
I feel like it's gonna give them an extra feeling of security, freedom to be themselves, freedom of self-expression.
The school is set to open in September, accepting 27th and 8th grade students their first year. Nicolari says the home for Proud Academy is the Boys and Girls Club in Ansonia, the same town she grew up in the same town that embraced her when she came out in the 90s.
So here I am at 65. I'm not retiring, I'm rewiring and opening Proud Academy.
She says the need for a school like Proud Academy has never been greater. More than 400 anti-LGBTQ+ bills have been introduced across the nation since the start of this year, many targeting schools.
There's absolutely a need for it. And I always thought, if we build it, will they come? Well, they are.
A place for students to be proud of who they are while getting their education. DeAndrea Turner, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
Coming up next on Pride is Everywhere.
Some doctors won't even look at you.
The struggle for gender-affirming medical care, and what does the future for the LGBTQ+ community look like? Welcome back to Pride is Everywhere. Now, throughout tonight's show, we've gone back in history to highlight the milestones that have shaped the LGBTQ+ community. Next up, Fox 61's Jen Bernstein takes a look at the hurdles in the medical field that the community has overcome and continues to fight for.
In 1917, Alan L. Hart became one of the first trans men to undergo hysterectomy and gonadectomy as treatment to what is now known as gender dysphoria. In 1948, biologist and sex researcher Alfred Kinsey published Sexual Behavior of the Human Male that concluded homosexual behavior is not restricted to people who identify as being homosexual. 4 years later, the American Psychiatric Association listed homosexuality as a sociopathic personality disturbance in its list of mental disorders. This was criticized due to the lack of empirical and scientific data. It would take the APA more than 20 years to change this distinction. Christine Jorgensen became the first American to undergo gender-affirming surgery in 1952. June 1981, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported the first cases of what would later be known as AIDS, the first cases in the U.S. of the deadly disease decimating the gay community. 4 years later, actor Rock Hudson died of AIDS-related causes, one of many lost in the arts community. Although AIDS was first reported in 1981, it was not until the end of his presidency that Ronald Reagan spoke publicly about the epidemic. On December 1, 1988, the World Health Organization organized the first World AIDS Day to raise awareness about the disease. In August 1990, President George H.W. Bush signed the Ryan White Care Act, a federally funded program for people living with AIDS. Ryan White was an Indiana teenager who contracted AIDS in 1983 through a tainted hemophilia treatment. The AIDS cocktail was introduced in 1995, which dramatically improved the lives of people living with HIV. In 2012, the Food and Drug Administration approved Truvada as a daily preventative for those at risk of acquiring HIV. That same year, the APA removed gender identity disorder from its list of mental disorders. It replaced it with the diagnosis gender dysphoria. This led to a 2014 ruling that Medicare must cover surgery for gender transition. In May 2023, the Food and Drug Administration officially eliminated most restrictions that had prohibited gay and bisexual men from making blood donations. These restrictions on donating blood dated back to the early days of the AIDS pandemic. In the 21st century, LGBTQ plus healthcare has become more widely normalized. However, a lot of protections for transgender students have been rolled back.
For the trans community, it continues to be a struggle to get quality health care, in part because transitioning often requires a whole host of specialized services. And as Fox 61's Tim Lemmers reports, there can be just as many barriers to those services as they are services themselves.
I'll be honest, outside of Connecticut, some doctors won't even look at you.
Dawn Ennis put it succinctly: to be trans is to be persistent.
I had a doctor who was treating me who refused to meet me eye to eye, make eye contact. And I asked him one day, I said, "What's the problem here?" He says, "Don't you understand? We don't want you here. We don't want you in our office."
Not just persistent in finding health care, but unfortunately, persistent in convincing people it's even needed.
You have to insist over and over and over again. You have to sort of prove that it's quote unquote not a phase. You have to do all these things to show that it is real and true.
Dr. Laura Saunders from Hartford Healthcare said that leads to the first barrier trans people often face. They get discouraged from seeking out care in the first place.
Very often, trans, non-binary, gender nonconforming folks have a fear of being discriminated against, stigmatized, rejected. So they don't seek out any health care.
So many people would rather just basically stay inside for risk of being hurt or being scared or being rejected.
And when trans people do seek out care, finding a competent and compassionate doctor requires that same persistence, but also patience.
I would say the two biggest barriers right now are access to care, and then once you get access, oftentimes people are waiting 6 months, 9 months, a year, 15 months, 18 months.
Ennis said she had to go out of state for her gender-affirming surgery in 2018.
I mean, we need specialized care. So we need to start there with training doctors to be better at dealing with patients like us.
So for all of the barriers out there to healthcare, progress is being made and more options are becoming available, like Hartford Healthcare's Center for Gender Health, which has been open for less than a year.
We started this because we knew that the need was great.
Dr. Saunders is the director of the center, which is in Hartford.
We have a multidisciplinary clinic that offers endocrinology, primary care, psychiatry, and behavioral health, psychology.
The idea is to make it easier for people to navigate the whole system, from finding the right doctors.
We have handpicked our providers.
To helping work with insurance companies on certain procedures.
We have the ability to write those letters or get you access to providers who can certify that a procedure is medically necessary.
And because cost is often a huge barrier, they work with insurance companies.
And if you're not insured, we have Husky Insurance, so we can get you access to insurance.
And Husky Health has expanded its coverage of trans healthcare over the years by declaring not just some gender-affirming surgeries to be medically necessary, but even some facial feminization surgeries as well.
It helps them blend in. And honestly, with people being so hateful these days, I think anything that helps you blend in is good.
Both Ennis and Dr. Saunders said it's progress in a field that needs a lot more of it.
Every 5 to 10 years, we have gained, a level of progression. We still have a ways to go.
I'm Tim Lammers, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
Coming up when Pride Is Everywhere returns, what does the future hold for the LGBTQ plus community? And in their own words, where they've been and where they're going. Welcome back. LGBTQ plus people have faced many obstacles as a group and in their individual lives, but they have come a long way since that rebellion at the Stonewall Inn. Well, now as we see more anti-LGBTQ plus legislation being proposed across the country, they still remain hopeful in their fight for full equality and acceptance. Fox 61's Jake Garcia has more on the hope this community has for the future.
When thinking of LGBTQ plus Pride Month, certain words come to mind.
Pride is about being who you are, being seen as who you are, and being loved and cared for and supported for who you are as who you are.
Love, inclusivity.
Visibility. It means that those spaces that oftentimes we don't see any empowerment or acceptance, we see that now.
And hope. Right now, hope may seem faded to some as proposed anti-LGBTQ plus legislation and laws continue at record rates. Recently, the Human Rights Campaign issued an emergency declaration for LGBTQ plus people living in the U.S.
I definitely don't have hope for the present, but for the future, I do have hope.
Like the flag that represents this community, hope continues to be a beacon for LGBTQ plus people.
History repeats itself, and that's being shown, but we've prevailed in the past, and we shall prevail in the future.
For many, hope is living authentically in a world where hate, homophobia, and transphobia are things of the past.
Promoting inclusion, love, acceptance, diversity, taking a trend away from the politics of hate and division.
Realizing we are more alike than different, and different isn't so bad after all.
We start learning and we start connecting on our differences and accepting and affirming them.
As when people can show up as their authentic selves, that's when we can really thrive as a community.
In the words of Harvey Milk, hope is up to all of us.
There's hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, not only gays, but those blacks and the Asians and the disabled and seniors, the us's without hope, the us's give up. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you, and you, and you have got to give them hope.
Jake Garcia, Fox 61, Connecticut's news station.
As we close out the show, we wanted to highlight just some of the millions of stories that make up the LGBTQ plus tribe.
My name is Erica Suarez. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as a woman, lesbian, any of the above.
My name is Jake Garcia. I am a gay man, and my pronouns are he, him.
My name is Dawn Anasty. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a transgender woman, but I like to say being trans is like the 5th most interesting thing about me.
My name is Rafael Feliciano Roman. I'm an openly queer Boricua man of color.
I'm Regina Dayton.
For the longest time, I called myself a lesbian. Then I called myself bisexual. And now I just call myself open.
Yes, my pronouns are he, she, they, or thickums. I actually prefer thickums over all the rest. And so anyone who knows me in this world will call me thickums, and that's my preferred pronouns.
I spoke to my bosses at work, and we worked out a plan in which I would come out slowly to my team, to my coworkers. This was ABC News, and it turns out I was the first out transgender journalist in TV network news. What I didn't expect was all the support I got. People were just so wonderful. And the other thing I didn't expect was that the New York Post would make fun of me.
The cutest one, I remember, was still being in elementary school age, young enough to be wearing frilly little dresses, which I just loved, and frilly socks and patent leather shoes, and having a crush on Wanda the Bulldagger. Wanda, the Bulldagger.
I came out to my friends in high school, but not really to my family until I was 21. So I grew up in Texas, conservative town, and my family grew up in church, so it was kind of, it was kind of a scary thing to come out.
I probably knew from high school. I had always told my close friends that I was going to have a relationship with a woman at some point. I just didn't know where and when.
Came out to my parents. It was a really awkward and uncomfortable time growing up in a Latino Boricua household. They did not take it well.
I ended up marrying a man from Hart College who was an opera major, who I met identifying as a gay man. Totally knew him as my safe gay male friend. What can I say? We loved each other. That's what I'm saying. Now I just call myself just open to love wherever it comes from. We didn't break up over sexuality or anything. We broke up over his drug addiction and depression.
I think safe for me is conditional on which circumstances I'm at within this city or within this space, within this community. Right now, in this cultural center, this little mecca haven of queer poets and thinkers and artists, my little Andy Warhol Thickums self has created a little culture of safety here.
In Connecticut, I feel safe. There are places in this country I can no longer go. I can't use the women's room without someone possibly challenging me. Now, I think I'm very lucky. I think most people see me and they see a woman.
Here in Connecticut, I do feel safer. There's always, going through life as an LGBTQ person, you're always wondering, what if this? What if that? Just because of the way we've kind of gone through life and the intolerance that we've seen, the hatred that we've seen. So I think I feel safer out and about, but I'm always wondering, what if?
From purely a queer standpoint, I think I feel mostly safe, yeah. But I think I also grew up in a very closeted world. Even though it was open and welcome and accepting and we love you for who you are, it didn't change the fact that I grew up in a time where Ellen wasn't on TV. There were no gay icons.
I'm so scared for those folks who don't live in these places. Texas, Florida, Kansas, Missouri, Montana. The list goes on.
I would tell my high school self that everything's going to be okay. The weight of the world seems like it's on you right now, but it's going to be okay. Things are going to change for the better.
It's not always been easy. It's not always been fun, and it hasn't always felt great. But it's been worth it.
No matter what's going on around you, no matter how hard it gets, you gotta keep doing you, baby. Because only you can do you.